is Left, Right and Centre. I'm Nidhi Razdan. Our big focus tonight. Did India shoot down an Pakistani F-16 in the dogfight with Pakistan a day after the Balakot airstrike? India has consistently maintained it has and even shared evidence with the United States. But now a well-respected US magazine called Foreign Policy has claimed that US officials have counted all of Pakistan's F-16s and that they are all accounted for. So does this raise doubts about India's version about what happened? Does the United States need to place the information in public domain? Does India need to place the evidence in public domain? From the controversy over how many terrorists were killed in Balakot to this, India's version of how things went down have been called into question by some. But are those questions legitimate? That's what we're talking about over the next 30 minutes. Well, let's take a look in some detail at what Foreign Policy magazine has claimed. The magazine quotes two senior unnamed US defense officials as saying that US personnel recently counted Islamabad's F-16s and found none missing, directly contradicting the account of the Indian Air Force, which has said that Wing Commander Abhinandan shot down a Pakistani F-16 before his own plane was downed by a Pakistani missile. Now, the article says that Pakistan invited the United States to physically count its F-16s after the incident as part of an end-user agreement signed when the foreign military sale was finalized. Generally, in such agreements, the US requires the receiving country to allow US officials to inspect the equipment regularly to ensure that it's accounted for and protected. Some of the aircraft were not immediately available for inspection due to the conflict, the report says, so it took US personnel several weeks to actually account for all of the jets. And now they say the count has been completed and all the aircraft present were present and they were accounted for. Well, the Indian Air Force has hit back with a statement today, sticking by its position that they believe an F-16 was shot down by Abhinandan. They have said, among other things, that there were a large force of Pakistani jets that were picked up by Indian Air Force radars. They were intercepted by the IAF's Sukhois, Mirage and the MiG-21 Bison, which is what Abhinandan was flying. That all the attempts of Pakistani jets were thwarted by the IAF, and that the electronic signatures gathered by the Indian Air Force suggest that the Pakistani jet was an F-16. That is what the Indian Air Force statement essentially says. My colleague Vishnu Shom, who is our defense editor, is going to first take us through more on what the Air Force is saying. Vishnu, one thing to remember, of course, Vishnu, is that Foreign Policy, as I said, is a very well-respected magazine, but is also not quoting anyone on record. They're quoting unnamed officials. The Air Force argument essentially is what? Do they know for sure that an F-16 was shot down, or is this an assumption that they're making based on whatever circumstantial evidence is there?
Well, you can call it circumstantial evidence, but I think to me, in speaking to quite a few senior Indian Air Force officials today in a gathering in which Ajay was also present, there is no conspiracy of silence or of lying as far as the Indian Air Force is concerned. They genuinely believe, it is my belief, that they genuinely think that they did shoot down an F-16, and they believe that the evidence they have actually backs up that particular claim. That being the case, what is it that they're actually trying to say? There are lots of details, but I will point out only one detail. They showed us two tracks of airborne warning aircraft. One of those tracks had a symbol. It was Abhinandan's plane. There was an F-16 symbol right next to it. This was off Rajouri across the line of control. The next frame, which in the timeline was just 8 seconds later, had that symbology of that symbol of that F-16 missing, which they believe marked a shoot down. Further corroborating that evidence, they say that they have intercepted radio communications, tactical radio communications at that stage, which indicates to them that one of the F-16s in this formation didn't return. However, it needs to be pointed out that I asked them actually if we could hear that radio transmission. They said that they had not been cleared to release it. So, circumstantial evidence, but I believe fairly strong evidence, certainly stronger than what we've seen in the past.
All right, let's go across to our panelists with us tonight. Ajay Shukla is back with us, a well-known strategic affairs expert. He's, of course, served in the Indian Army as well. Air Commodore Prashant Dikshit is with us tonight. Also, Michael Kugelman from the Wilson Center joining us from Washington, and author and commentator Shantanu Gupta joining us as well. Michael Kugelman, to you first, because you were tweeting about this story this morning, and you said that it actually hurts India's narrative post-Balakot, on Balakot and post-Balakot even further. First, sort of the international questions that were raised on the number of terrorists killed, and now this. You've heard just now what the Indian Air Force is saying. Does that hold up according to you?
Well, I think that the optics for India are very problematic here because, as you indicated, this is a pretty credible American news outlet and a very good reporter that has had these conversations with these two unnamed U.S. officials who have said that they counted Pakistani F-16s and didn't find anything missing. Certainly, there's a lot that we don't know. There's a lot that we'll never know. But I think the fact that we've already had so much controversy post-Balakot from the Indian side as to what exactly happened and as to whether the claims that India has made are indeed completely accurate. We know there's been a lot of uncertainty as to what exactly was hit in Balakot, if terrorist targets were indeed hit, if you indeed did have these many terrorist casualties that India has claimed took place. So I think it's in that context that we have to be somewhat skeptical, in my view, about some of these latest comments from the IAF. Certainly, there's been a lot put out there in terms of the proof that we're told exists, whether it's Pakistani radio communications or sightings or electronic signatures or whatever the case may be. But until we see more indication that that proof exists, I think that there's good reason to be skeptical. And again, considering what already happened over the last few weeks, given the questions about what happened in the Balakot strike.
All right, I'll take this to Ajay as well. That what do you think is actually stopping then the Indian government or the Air Force from releasing the evidence that we have? Are there strategic reasons why this is not released? What are the reasons?
Well, the fact that the Indian Air Force is talking to journalists means that the Indian Air Force really badly wants to put its case out, but the fact that it's not releasing the evidence officially means that it's being held back at some level or the other. Now, the problem within this case is really very simple. It is that Pakistan has evidence that can be seen, that can be felt, and that can be put out. They've got the wreckage of a MiG-21, they have a pilot captured who was all over on television, and they actually managed to occupy the moral high ground insofar as Pakistan can ever occupy moral high ground by returning him unscathed and in good shape. The Indian Air Force has evidence too, and it was presented to us today, as Vishnu brought out. But that's all technical evidence. It's all evidence in terms of radio intercepts, in terms of radar screens which are difficult to map and difficult to explain, and for security reasons which they are not permitted to put out as well. So in this perception battle that is going on over here, India is at a very disadvantageous position compared to Pakistan. If I was in the place of the Indian Air Force chief, I would be going to the Prime Minister and saying, I need to put my case out there. This is a question of my credibility. But for some reason or the other, they're not doing it.
Air Commodore Dixit, you served in the Indian Air Force. What's your take on this?
After hearing Vishnu, I'm truly thrilled. It fills my heart to know that my own service did precisely that they had to do. They had shown him radar traces, and which he saw for himself that a blip had disappeared. They kept off some radio intercepts for reasons, for those are one of secrecy. There are times, if you recall, I was in front of you discussing Balakot pictures,
yeah,
and that has not been divulged. Reasons for those are also similar. There are some things which you just can't share. But let me go straight forward to what Ajay has said about, stature of two nations and what they have done. There is a big strategy at play in some defense officials going and counting some things and whose names are not being divulged. Lara Seligman is a known author, but she essentially is a Pentagon person. State Department has not...
What is a Pentagon person? She covers the Pentagon.
She's been with Pentagon all the time, doing Pentagon's bidding and writing. Ma'am, if I have to speak with great honesty, with no disrespect to her, I've read her for a long time. But the end user certificate bit is not sorted out by the State Department so far. They have not even accepted publicly that is written in the end user certificate. And then the Vijay Gokhale went there the other day and made the same pitch, but the State Department has not offered any rationale for that.
Yeah.
On the other hand, the Seligman article appears a month earlier. They are talking about the Lockheed Martin finding a niche amongst buyers in India, and a month later you get a report that all aircraft are being counted. Ma'am, this is a business strategy.
A business strategy.
Yes, ma'am. And let me also go on to add, there are problems in American aviation circles these days with the Boeing MAX 737 MAX problem, and now Lockheed discovering that an F-16 has been shot down by Bison. Those are problematic areas, I think.
Okay, that's an interesting take. I want to ask Michael Kugelman about that before I come to Shantanu about the political fallout of all of this. Michael, do you just want to take on what Air Commodore Dixit is saying there, that this is actually a business strategy by the Americans to sort of put this story out there or plant it?
Well, I'm not sure that I buy that at all. Laura Seligman is an excellent reporter who's been doing a tremendous amount of excellent reporting on Pentagon-related issues. She has good sources at the Pentagon, even though they're not identified in this article. I don't see any reason to think that what was reported should not be seen with a lot of credibility. And, lest we forget, I don't see any reason why, or these unnamed officials, these Pentagon officials, they would have no reason, no incentive to lie, for that matter. Washington is a city where you have a lot of talk on Pakistan. You have a lot of folks that are not friends of Pakistan. And if there really had been a Pakistani F-16 that was shot down, someone, one would think, would have come out there and been willing to leak or admit the fact that it had been shot down. So I think that's an important thing to put out there. So I really don't think that we should try to poke holes in the report. Certainly there's other issues to discuss, such as these points that the IAF has brought out today, and I think that's worth pursuing. But the actual article itself, I really don't think we should look at that as a problem. I don't think the United States or the U.S. government has any reason to hide or cover up the fact of any sort of
which is why it actually becomes important, I think, for as much as India, Vishnu, then for the United States to also make public what evidence India has shared. India has shared evidence with the US as well. I'm presuming that this radars pictures that you were shown today would have been shared with the Americans too.
It wasn't, and we actually
why not?
Actually Ajay asked, or someone asked why or whether that was actually shared. And the Indian Air Force said, no, why should we share it? What business or what requirement is there to share it? But I do believe that the Indian Air Force at some stage, perhaps earlier on, certainly earlier on, should have gone to the Americans and said, since you do have end-user agreements with the Pakistan Air Force, since the buy of even Jordanian F-16s, which have entered the Pakistan Air Force, is regulated by US policy, give us an idea of what you think on the numbers of F-16s that do exist. Perhaps that should have come in simultaneously as the Indian Air Force claimed that, look, we have scored a hit on an F-16. This article has now come up, and now we find the Indian Air Force a month and a half later jumping to provide some sort of explanation. I believe the explanation given today is pretty valid, it's pretty understandable, but it should have come a long time earlier on, and certainly reaching out to America was important. And yes, Nidhi, America should speak about this.
But they
their
won't.
silence is strange.
That's what I'm coming to Ajay about. That do you really expect the Americans to take a public position on this, given the sensitivity of their relationship with Pakistan? Are the Americans just going to sort of be safe and not make any public statements?
The Americans are absolutely going to play it safe over here. They have huge stakes in play in Afghanistan right now. Pakistan is delivering the Taliban to them at the negotiating table. They want to keep Pakistan on the right side because of its growing proximity to China. And they know that India has by and large achieved its aims in this Balakot strike and in the air battles that followed. The aim was as much domestic political as it was to signal to Pakistan. They know that Mr. Modi is satisfied with the outcome of that sort of sequence of events, and they know that they will not push beyond a point. So I think the Americans are where they want to be, and they're not going to take this any further.
I just want to get Shantanu in here because, so much of this is playing out on the election campaign. Shantanu, Mr. Modi keeps talking about Balakot and politically, the significance of this. Do you believe that, what the US is claiming or these US officials are claiming? I mean, do you think the Modi support base is going to care or that it's already made up its mind that India did a great job, it killed hundreds of terrorists and brought down a big Pakistani jet?
I think, Nitin, I think not at all. It will not bring down any of Indians' claim. And I think this is very interesting that because of India's assertiveness from last 4-5 years, now foreign media, and there are 3 cases which we have seen in just last couple of months. B is this F-16 MiG claim. B on NASA's claim that ASAT have released so many debris, and though they have released tons of debris, and also the Reuters news that came of Pulwama. So all of them, all of a sudden, India's assertiveness, I think they are not able to digest India's assertiveness under Narendra Modi. And international media is playing its trick, which they have played time and again with various other countries. And in Indian land, it's not going to do any effort. Indian people are with Prime Minister and Indian Air Force.
Ajay, just your quick take on the political fallout of this. Is there any?
But again,
any
No,
more?
I think I thought that
Just maybe 10 seconds, but I think there is a huge need.
Yes, go ahead, Shantanu. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah, huge need.
no, I think that
Yeah, there is a huge need of a international media from India, international electronic media, international print media, which will talk about the international news from India's perspective. We always miss that. We always have to believe on a BBC, on a Reuters, on a Washington Post, on a Al Jazeera, there is a high need for an Indian international broadcast.
Well, generally we would believe them a little more than some of the unnamed television channels. But I get what you're saying, that you don't have to blindly believe everything that the Western news media writes. But Ajay, just on the political point, since you follow politics so closely, do you think this plays out in any way? The Congress and the opposition actually have been very careful today to stay away from this issue. I think they're trying to avoid getting dragged into another national security debate.
To argue at this stage that there is an international media conspiracy against a resurgent India under Prime Minister Modi is to go back to the days of Indira Gandhi and her, foreign hand, and Indira Gandhi's statement that the CIA is conspiring against India. Let's be realistic over here. India is a major global power now. It is not going to be sort of bullied around by any sort of cabal of international media organizations. So let's take their reporting, evaluate it for what we consider it worth, and not believe in little conspiracy theories against India.
Commodore Dixit?
All I can say is that, the big bison is quite capable of shooting down an F-16 within a certain parameter.
Oh, yeah.
It can fly out, climb up by 10,000 feet per minute extra. It's possible. So if it gets closer in, it could do it. And it had done that in the past. In Cope India exercises, of which I attended at least 2 of them, the big bison came out shining. Now, one has to understand, the Indian Air Force spends a lot of energy at the TAC Day to find out these new tactics and strategies. It has achieved. But may I take this thing? It's not political at all. It's got something to do with the Americans trying to find a little space in our own relationship with Pakistan. I still believe it's business.
You still believe it's business?
Yes, and if it's writers first and now the foreign policy, they may not be linked. But
Well,
this is
quick
definitely
last
business.
comment, Vishnu, because I have to head into that
Right.
news that we're breaking on the bottom of the screen.
We aren't going to get to this bottom of this mystery very fast, possibly. Let me ask you a question, Nidhi. Squadron leader A.B. Devaya was shot down in the 1965 war. He won a Mahavir Chakra.
Yes.
You know how many years later? 23 years. 23 years later, when there was an admission or a sense that, look, this is what happened. We will never get to the bottom of whether this Pakistani F-16 was shot down.
Among other things. All right. Well, thank you very much to all of you for joining us this evening on what continues to be a fascinating story, which the international media certainly continues to have a lot of interest in.